and obesity. I'm sorry to put all those words smushed up against each other so violently, but that is what we're here to talk about today. And yet those three words are enough to make most people fairly nervous. I'm a nutrition scientist, and not surprisingly, we like to talk about food quite a lot. However, there are certain conventions within my discipline, as I'm sure there are in many. One of the conventions of my discipline is that I'm supposed to be very third person. I'm supposed to be part of a great amorphous mass of scientists, and certainly not to have too much personality. In fact, one of the statements for giving a talk like this is that I must not focus too much on myself. However, before I was a scientist, I was an actor, and my actor self knows that in order for you to really understand what I'm saying, you need to hear a three-dimensional, relatable human character and not just a disembodied scientific voice speaking at you from a stage. So that's what we're going to do. So hi, by the way, I am a scientist. I'm also a mother, a caker, a gardener, an SFX makeup practitioner, and an actress. So I'm here to talk to you about food, health, and obesity, as I said. Alright, so why should we care? Why are we still talking about food, health, and obesity? Well, unless you've been living under a rock, you will know that we are in the midst of an obesity crisis in this country and indeed internationally. In our particular country, at the moment, 60% of us are overweight or obese, and by 2025 that is predicted to rise to 80% of our population. Okay, is it just a matter of being a little bit too fat? No. Obesity is also associated with a number of other non-communicable disease states, like asthma, type 2 diabetes, an increased risk for cancer, cardiovascular disease, and a whole raft of other problems. So the general advice is stop being obese. Get healthier, right? Balance your calories, control your weight gain. Follow the scientific recommendations that are set out for you by, for instance, the Australian Dietary Guidelines. Except that none of that's working. The message is not getting through. So this year, a really interesting study came out from some Finnish researchers. And in that particular study, they found 2,500 women and just over 2,000 men, which is what we would call a fairly significant study sample. Very significant study sample. And they followed these people over a 10-year period between the ages of 24 and 35, which is when they collected their data at those 2 points. Now, what they found with these people, what termed the young adult time of life, is that 75% of them gained weight, 25% of them maintained weight, 0% of them lost weight. What the researchers said from this is that the idea that weight gain in young adulthood is a bad thing may not necessarily be the best way to focus. It seems it may be the norm, the new norm, in fact. Now, they found some factors that were particularly associated with those that had gained weight. These were common factors amongst all the study participants who had gained weight. Amongst women, the first factor was a propensity to consume sweet drinks. Now, I don't know about you. For me that would mean wine, but for others maybe it means Coke or Dr. Pepper. I don't know. The second thing that was identified was irregular eating or dieting. That's right, dieting made you fat. Dieting was a contributing factor to gaining weight. We'll figure it out in a second. The third factor was low satisfaction with life, which is really interesting, and we'll come back to that. And the fourth factor was 2 or more children. Now, for men, the 2 identified factors with overweight and obesity were irregular dieting and smoking. Now, obviously the only one that's in common between the genders there is the irregular dieting and irregular eating. But it seems that going on a diet is likely to make you fat. As crazy as that sounds, but that is backed up by literature. So I wanted to go back and have a little bit of a closer look at those parameters that we identified that were common to those that had gained weight between the ages of 24 and 35. Particularly, for the purposes of today, I'd like to look mostly at the women. Surprisingly enough, because I am one. I also happen to be exactly part of the cohort that they studied. I too was born in the 1970s, and I too gained weight in my 20s and 30s. So I'm rather interested in this from a personal point of view. Shouldn't say that scientifically. We're going to. Okay, so in that age period there, you've got 24 to 35. A few things tend to happen to a woman in that particular period, one of which is you meet a nice fella, maybe, if you're lucky. The other thing that's really, really common to that period, and in fact, I've got a nice little graph here to show you, is you get pregnant. That happens when you meet a nice fella sometimes. So they tell me. I don't know. What do I know? I'm a scientist. You have children. Now, any of you who've had children, people are laughing at me, you will know that weight gain is just a little bit unavoidable. In fact, you're supposed to. You are actually supposed to gain weight for that baby, for the baby's health. And then there's a slight problem with we might start eating for two, even though we know that we shouldn't. We also might start saying, bugger it, I'll just eat my craving thing, be it chocolate or chips or that very, very large slice, simply because I feel bad and my hormones are out of whack. Okay, so you put on weight, obviously. The other thing that's happened, of course, when you've been pregnant there is that your career or your employment is probably on something of a hiatus, if not quite compromised. This causes a lot of anxiety in young women. Your marital relationship will require some adjustment. And there's actually a lot of tension and a lot of literature based on the changes that happen within a marriage as people transition from young happy singles, Romeo and Juliet, to parents. On top of that, so our lady has pregnancies. She has anxiety related to her job. She has anxieties related to her marriage. On top of that, once she's given birth, which quite frankly wasn't as easy as they made it look, she then has to get rid of the baby weight. And she's surrounded by a raft of celebrities that do it in 2 weeks. In fact, she's surrounded by a raft of programs available to her for a mere $97 a month. They will teach her exactly how to get back her pre-baby body. Now, in a 2015 Roy Morgan poll that was done in this country, on top of those things that we just mentioned, a woman is also far more likely, still 90% more likely, to be doing all of the shopping and the cooking for her family, on top of everything else. Now, that might seem a little bit 1950s, unfortunately it is still very much true. So then she goes to the supermarket to do her shopping, and she is presented with a year-round cornucopia of plenty. It absolutely overwhelming messages. There's the messages of every marketing company involved in every product on that shelf. She is literally bombarded with organic, GMO, gluten-free, fat-free, sugar-free, you name it, there's thousands. Pasture-fed, grain-fed, right? It's enough to make anybody nuts. All of these competing messages in her head. I have to lose weight, I've got to look after my children, I've got to fix my marriage, gosh, I've got to get back to my career, I've got to feed everybody healthily. It really is no wonder that this woman is suffering from a fairly serious amount of anxiety. Now, anxiety, what does that do to us? For starters, it raises a tiny little fella we call cortisol in our bloodstream. Cortisol is a stress hormone. It's there, evolutionary speaking, to make sure that our fight or flight system kicks into being. Trouble is when it's in your blood all the time, every day, what you get is an increase in your hunger response, the hormone responsible for that is ghrelin, and you get an increase in fat storage. So a consistent level of anxiety daily anxiety. It means you have daily high cortisol, which means you are getting fatter and fatter. And if you diet, if you restrict, your body just thinks it's starving. Again, this is just an evolutionary adaptation. There's no food coming in. I will store what I can for the period of hardship to come. But the period of hardship doesn't come. We just store and store. It's supposed to keep us alive. Unfortunately, in 2018, it's going to kill us. Now, my opinion is that we've lost our relationship with food. All these other voices have drowned out our own very natural reactions to our own foodstuffs. Now, just for a second, I want you to think about something as silly and ubiquitous as an apple. Now, we all like apples. I love apples. I think they're great. However, an apple is something you can find in your local Coles or Woolies every day of every year. There is always an apple in a big bag of them to put in the kids' lunches, right? Not so very long ago, that apple was something you had to wait all year for, right? In spring, you would see the tree burst into thousands of gorgeous silver blossoms. You would enjoy that. No apple though, just blossoms. You'd watch them mature over summer. You go going from tiny little marbles, starting to fill out, gaining a blush, right? Maybe you're worried that the insects are going to get at them. You start netting, you start spraying, whatever it happens to be. And finally, at the end of autumn, you get to taste an apple. Once a year, you get to taste this amazing thing called an apple. And as a result of the fact that you have been denied that for the rest of the year, you enjoy that damn apple. It tastes better than all the apples did last year. You're certain of it. It's because you've had a period of denial. You've had a period where you need to yearn for it, to remember it, to think of it. We don't have that anymore. We have an endless supply, a constant cornucopia. And as a result of constantly having these things available, we have literally dulled our senses to our own food sources. I'm going to tell you a little tiny story about a little experiment that I did a little while ago. I went to a Lions Club to speak to them about poetry and food. I know, it's a strange combination, but stay with me. What happened was that I presented them with a little platter. It was very, very simple. In the middle of the platter were two little water crackers. One had some triple brie, the other one had some goat's cheese. One side of the plate was cut up Packham pears from Coles, you know, just the green ones, just the normal fellas. And the other side was some cut up Rousselet de Reine pears. Now, I told the story of these pears, right? The Packhams, I didn't give a story. They don't really have one. The Rousselet de Reine, on the other hand, were beloved by Louis XIV. They were coveted by Anne Boleyn, which is one of Henry VIII's goodbyes, yeah, when she was pregnant. Winston Churchill's wife adored them, and they are known all over the world for being the most fragrant, the most beautiful, the most incredible pear that you can taste. And I had men blindfold their wives, feed them morsels of each pear. The Lions Club weren't quite sure what hit them, incidentally. The reactions were gorgeous. I thought she was here to talk about poetry. There's blindfolds. It was fun. Okay, so what happened is very predictable. I didn't give the Packham pears a story at all. And when I asked the ladies to rate the flavour and the fragrance of those pears, I got a 3 and a 4, respectively. When I asked them to rate the flavour and the fragrance of the Rousselet de Reine, I got a 9 and a 10, respectively. The trick being, it wasn't a Rousselet de Reine. I lied. Again, honestly, scientists will sometimes lie to you. I just lied to you. I do apologise. However, it was for research purposes, so I guess that makes it okay. Anyway, the point is, it wasn't a Rousselet de Reine. It was just a Corella. It was just another supermarket pear. Okay? The difference is that the story that went with that pear woke people people up to actually tasting a pear, probably for the first time in years. This wasn't blind shoving it in your gob. They were tasting the food. They were tasting the story. When I had finished the presentation, people came to the front and sort of huddled around the plates, wanting to get their bit of the pear story. They really wanted to taste these amazing things. My point. Okay, what's my point? My point is that I don't think reductionist empiricism has all the answers when it comes to solving the obesity crisis and when it comes to reconnecting to our food. I think we need to retell the story. I think we need to change our language. I think that we need to leave where we've been as nutrition scientists for greener pastures. And I truly believe that in order to solve the anxieties and social determinants of health that contribute to the obesity crisis, one of the key points is reconnecting to our food and the stories of our food, and not allowing massive marketing companies whose intention is profit, not your health, to tell us the stories.